Hello everyone, welcome to Intellipaat. Many firms today still have legitimate worries about moving apps to the cloud. Chief decision makers are plagued by worries about network security, availability, and potential downtime, which can paralyze enterprises into sticking with their current technology even though it is getting older by the minute. Now, this is where Microsoft Azure comes in, which is one of the most popular and rapidly expanding cloud service providers. Future growth of Azure is anticipated, and with increased demand comes a need for additional Azure professionals. In the IT industry, administrative positions have historically been most demanding. The majority of students are already getting set to become knowledgeable Azure admins. And for those students, we are here to address some of the most often asked interview questions in Azure admin interviews. But before we begin, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell icon for regular updates. We will start with some basic interview questions. So the first question is, what do you understand by cloud computing? In order to store, manage, analyze, and process data, cloud computing refers to the use of computational resources, or also called as servers, over the internet. Here, we use infrastructure offered and maintained by third-party suppliers like Microsoft, AWS, and many others, and pay them based on the amount of time the servers are used. The benefits of cloud computing include increased execution speed, resource flexibility, and simpler scaling. High fault tolerance and high system availability can be attained with cloud computing, and this can be done dynamically depending on the application's infrastructure needs. Now, moving on to the second question. Could you tell something about Azure Cloud Service? A prime example of a platform as a service is Azure Cloud Service, or also known as PaaS. This was created to assist applications that need high levels of scalability, stability, and availability while yet operating at a low cost. These are housed on virtual machines, or also called as VMs, and Azure gives developers more control over them by allowing them to install the required software and grant remote access. By setting up a cloud service instance, Azure Cloud Services are used to deploy multi-tier web-based applications on Azure. For the purpose of distributed processing, it is also feasible to specify numerous roles such as web roles, worker roles, etc. Azure Cloud Services aid in the application's more straightforward and adaptable scalability. Each cloud service role has a distinct function which corresponds to a different configuration and set of application files. Now let us move on to the third question. How many models are available for cloud deployment? Describe them briefly. So firstly, we have public cloud. In this approach, the cloud provider owns the cloud infrastructure on behalf of the general public, and many apps may share server resources. Okay, let us move on to the next one. We have private cloud. In this case, we exclusively own the cloud infrastructure, or the cloud provider only serves us. This involves hosting the applications either on our own in-house servers or on a dedicated server offered by the cloud provider. Next, we have hybrid cloud. As implied by the name, this architecture combines both private and public clouds, using on-site servers for processing private sensitive data and public cloud capabilities for hosting apps with a public front could be examples of this. Now let us move on to the fourth question. In Microsoft Azure, define role instance. Simply said, a role instance is a virtual computer where application code is run in conjunction with running role specifications. In accordance with the specification in the cloud service configuration files, a role may also have more than one instance. Now let us move on to the fifth question. How many different cloud service roles does Azure offer? A collection of application and configuration files make up cloud service roles. Azure offers two different categories of roles. We have the web role and worker role. Now let us know what are these two roles. Web role. This offers an Internet Information Services, or also known as IIS, dedicated web server for hosting and automatically deploying front-end websites. Coming to the worker role, these roles often don't require IIS and assist the applications hosted within them in running asynchronously for longer periods of time while remaining independent of user interactions. They are also perfect for running background operations. The programs are administered independently of one another. Now, moving on to the sixth question. Why do we require Azure Diagnostic API? We may gather diagnostic information from apps operating on Azure, such as performance monitoring, system event logs, etc., with the use of the Azure Diagnostics API. The cloud service roles must have Azure Diagnostics enabled in order to observe and data verbosely. The diagnostics data can be utilized to generate performance metric warnings as well as visual chart representations for improved monitoring. Now, moving on to the seventh question. What does Azure Service Level Agreement or SLA stand for? The Azure SLA is a contract that ensures or guarantees that access to a cloud service is provided for at least 99.95% of the time when two or more role instances of a role are deployed on Azure. Additionally, it adds that 99.9% of the time such processes will be detected and corrective action will be performed for them if the role instance process is not in the operating state. Depending on the pricing structure of the relevant Azure services, Azure credits us a portion of our monthly expenses if the aforementioned assurances are not met at any time. Now, moving on to the eighth question. What is Azure Resource Manager? A service offered by Azure for administration and application deployment in Azure is called Azure Resource Manager. The Resource Manager offers a management layer that aids in the creation, modification, or deletion of resources in the Azure subscription account by the developer. When we need to manage access restrictions, locks, ensure the security of the resources after deployment, and organize those resources, this function is quite helpful. Now, moving on to the ninth question, describe NSG. So, NSG here stands for Network Security Group. It is a collection of ACL, or also known as Access Control List. So, it is a collection of ACL that rules either permit or prohibit network traffic from reaching subnets. Network interface cards, or also known as NICs, connect to a subnet or both of them. The ACL rules are applied to all of the virtual machines in a subnet while NSG is attached to it. By directly associating NSG to a particular NIC, traffic restrictions to that NIC can be implemented. Now we move on to the 10th question, which is the last question of the easy questions. What is a cloud service scale? So by increasing the number of role instances deployed for a role, a cloud service can be scaled out. By reducing the number of role instances, a cloud service is scaled up. When you scale your service roles in the preview management portal, you can also scale a linked SQL database instance by modifying the SQL database edition and maximizing database size. Now let us move on to some intermediate interview questions. And this is the 11th question. It goes like, how does Azure Redis cache work? So Azure offers and maintains an open source in-memory Redis cache technology. And by retrieving data from the backend database, saving it in the Redis cache, and then retrieving data from the Redis cache for all the subsequent requests, it helps the web applications to increase performance. Then we have Azure Redis Cache utilizes the Azure cloud to deliver robust and secure caching solutions. Now let us move on to the 12th question. Define scale sets for Azure virtual machines. So to install and maintain groups of similar virtual machines, we use these Azure Compute Resources, or also known as VMs. The scale sets are similarly prepared and built to facilitate auto-scaling of the applications without the need for VM pre-provisioning. They make it simpler to develop large-scale apps that target containerized workloads and big data. Moving on to the 13th question. How well do you comprehend the availability set? The logical grouping of virtual machines, known as the availability set, it enables Azure Cloud to comprehend how an application was created to provide availability and redundancy. Azure assigns two different types of domains to each virtual machines in the availability set. So the first one we have is the fault domain, and the second one we have is the update domain. Up to 3 fault domains and 20 update domains can be configured for an availability set in Microsoft Azure. Moving on to the 14th question. What should you do in the event of a drive failure? So when the drive fails, you must do the following actions. Firstly, we must make sure that the drive is not mounted in order for Azure storage to operate flawlessly. And next we have, in order for the drive to be remounted and formatted, you will have to swap out the drive. Moving on to the 15th question. Define Azure storage key. In order to manage access to data depending on project needs, the Azure storage key is utilized for authentication and validation for access. For the purpose of authentication, 2 types of storage keys are provided. First one is the primary access key and the second one is the secondary access key. The primary goal of the secondary access key is to prevent application or website downtime. Moving on to the 16th question. What Azure solution is the most effective for running the code without a server? Now, code can be run without a server using the Azure Functions service. Serverless Azure functions are used to make difficult problem solving and complex orchestration simpler. They are designed to be transient and without states. They facilitate connections with other services without the requirement for integrations to be hard-coded, accelerating the development lifecycle. It facilitates the developer's ability to focus on writing business logic code and thereby saves time and effort. Additionally, they offer Azure Application Insight services for monitoring and evaluating code performance, which aid in finding bottlenecks and failure locations among applications' various components. Moving on to the 17th question. What distinguishes storage queues from Azure Service Bus queues? Azure supports the storage queue and service bus queue types of queue mechanisms. First one we have storage queues and next we have service bus queues. Now let us know what storage queues are. These are a component of the Azure storage system and have a straightforward get, put, peek interface, that is the REST based. And it offers dependent and persistent messaging both within and between services. Next we have service bus queues. They are a component of a larger Azure messaging infrastructure that provide publish, queuing, and more complex integration patterns. Now let us move on to the 18th question. What is Azure Service Fabric? Microsoft created the distributed platform known as Azure Service Fabric to make it easier to create, deploy, and manage highly scalable and adaptable applications. Applications developed in this environment are made up of independent microservices that interact with one another via service APIs. Moving on to the 19th question. What kinds of services can you create using the Service Fabric? You may primarily develop 2 sorts of services using the Service Fabric. The first one we have is the stateless services. Services that don't store any state are said to be stateless. An external database houses the longer term state. This is how services are often built using the application layer architecture. Next we have stateful services. This service keeps track of the state. It also permits the state to be preserved without a third-party database. Moving on to the next question. Explain Azure Blob Storage. Microsoft's cloud-based object storage solution is called Azure Blob Storage. Blob or binary large object is an acronym. Massive amounts of unstructured text or binary data are stored using blob-based storage. It is perfect for serving text, music, video, and documents straight to browsers. Anybody, anywhere in the world can access the data kept in blob storage. By organizing the blobs into containers, user accounts are connected to the blobs. There are 3 parts to the Azure Blob service. First, we have storage account. This could be a Microsoft Azure registered general storage account or blob storage account. Next, we have containers. Containers are used to aggregate blobs together. A container can hold an infinite amount of blobs. The container's name should begin in lowercase. Next, we have the actual blob. A blob is the binary large object which can be any form or file or document of any size. Azure has support for 3 different types of blobs. Now, let us move on to the advanced interview questions. And this is the 21st question. What does Azure Scheduler mean to you? We can call specific background triggers, events, or activities such as calling HTTPS endpoints or present a message on the queue at any time with the aid of the Azure Scheduler. By using this Azure Scheduler, the jobs now running in the cloud can summon services running both within and outside of Azure to execute jobs that are typically run on the set schedule, on demand, or to launch jobs at a later date. Moving on to the 22nd question. Is it feasible to map the window machines that are linked to an IIS web server through 2 separate port numbers to an Azure load balancer? So the answer is yes, you may accomplish this by creating a separate load balancer role in Azure. Now moving on to the 23rd question. What might lead the client application to become disconnected from the cache? So there are likely 2 causes out of which this can happen. First we have the client side causes and next we have the server side factors. Now coming to the client side causes, a possible redeployment of the application. It's also possible that the application was merely scaling. A change has been made to the client side networking layer. It can also be a transient problems that existed in the client or in the networking that was connecting the client and the server. Another cause can be that the bandwidth threshold constraint have been exceeded. Coming to the server side factors, if the Azure Redis cache service itself experiences a failure from the primary to the secondary node, this might happen. And the next thing is, it is also possible that the server instance where the cache was installed has undergone maintenance or patching. Now let us move on to the 24th question. What are IaaS, PaaS and SaaS? So IaaS stands for Infrastructure as a Service and refers to a set of infrastructure level capabilities such as operating systems, network connectivity, etc. that are provided on a pay-per-use basis. Applications are hosted on the infrastructure. Azure Virtual Machine and VNet are some examples. Now coming to PaaS. PaaS stands for Platform as a Service, which focuses on providing developers with an abstraction of the underlying infrastructure to enable faster application development without having to worry about the hosting maintenance. Examples include cloud services, storage services, and Azure web apps. Now coming to SaaS, it stands for Software as a Service, and it refers to those applications that are provided utilizing the service delivery paradigm and are merely consumed and used by an enterprise. In most cases, these applications are funded by charging the company to use them or by using advertisements. Applications like Office 365, Gmail, SharePoint Online, and others serve as examples. Now, moving on to the 25th question. What Azure feature may be used to resolve the problem of high application load when there is no man assistance on the flow? By specifying the right configuration and criteria to provision a new virtual machine whenever the load on the application grows, this problem can be resolved by using virtual machine scale sets. A set of load balanced virtual machines can be created and managed by a developer using Azure Virtual Machine scale sets. The scale sets can be set up such that the number of virtual machines automatically rises or falls in response to the application demand or in accordance with the predetermined timetable. The use of scale sets guarantees high availability of the applications, enables developers to manage, update, and configure massive virtual machines centrally, and supports the development of big data, enormous workloads, and compute-intensive applications. Up to 1,000 virtual machines can be supported by Azure scale settings. The cap is 600 virtual machines if the custom virtual machine images are made and uploaded. Now let us move on to the 26th question. What does dead letter queue mean? The messaging system places messages in the following situations on the dead letter sub queue. When a queue or subscription's maximum message delivery count is reached, when dead lettering is enabled on filter evaluation exceptions, and a subscription experiences a filler evaluation exception. Now let us move on to the 27th question. What are swap deployments? You can swap the deployments by changing the VIPs used to access the two deployments in order to promote one from the Azure staging environment to the production environment. The cloud services DNS name now points to the deployment that was previously in the staging environment after the deployment. Now moving on to the 28th question. What is CSPAP? So it is a command line utility that creates an application service package file, or also called as the .cspkg file, and it gets it ready for deployment either to Windows Azure or the compute emulator. Coming to the 29th question, what distinguishes a list from a library? A document written in Word, Excel or PowerPoint can be managed and stored using the library interface. The list, on the other hand, uses columns and rows to create a tabular representation of the object. It is compatible with document attachment. Now let us move on to the 30th question. Describe the Windows Azure table. So one type of Azure store is a table, which you can use to store your data. The following are the table's main ideas. Tables enable the storage of the structured data. A storage account can have 0 to n tables. A key value pair of characteristics and an important key make up an element. That's it from my side, guys. Thank you for watching till the end. Have a nice day.
Just a quick info, guys. Intellipaat provides Microsoft Azure certification training in partnership with Microsoft, the course link of which is given in the description below.